I think the biggest myth is that the place I am is more secure than where I want to be. I think that's a huge one. And in fact, I think if it's somebody trying to step either into a new career, into entrepreneurship themselves, or into just trying a side hustle or going after the next promotion, I think we get lulled into sleep that the place we are now is pretty secure. There's a real estate guru, a guy named Robert Allen, who a number of years ago wrote this phenomenal analogy where he said there's two doors in life, and one door says security and the other one says opportunity. And the person who reaches for the security door over the opportunity door almost always gets neither one. And I've seen that be the case so often. So I think if there's any misconception, it's that the security door is better than the opportunity door.
That's Joe Saul-Sehy, the host of the #1 financial advice podcast, The Stacking Benjamins. Joe was 40 when the resignation of a mentor left him re-examining his own career path in the financial planning industry. For many, the desire to align passion and potential is now a greater focus than ever before in one's career. But it can be a struggle to find what that path may be. Some may say it's still best to stay in your current lane for stability's sake. But for those searching for something more, what does it take to find your own professional purpose? Welcome to the Strategic Momentum Podcast, the show where we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders on what it takes to break through that inertia and propel you and your organization forward. Because it's all about understanding the business of work. I'm your host, Connie Steele. We start season 3 with a guest who has had several fresh starts in his career to get to where he is today. Joe Saul-Sehy made a career pivot later in life, taking him from being a successful financial planner and one of the select group of spokespeople for American Express to becoming an award-winning podcaster who leverages the science of play to build financial literacy among his listeners. In this episode, Joe shares his story behind his career journey to find his passion, purpose, and voice, as well as valuable insights and advice he's acquired along the way to reaching personal as well as professional fulfillment. We'll start off by learning about Joe's background as an English major, which he goes on to explain is a more common origin story in finance than people might think.
I wasn't somebody initially who was a finance person. I was an English major in school, yet I was finishing college. I'd actually just finished college, and I was working my first kind of, that horrible job you get right out of school, or that many of us get. Some people get the dream job. That wasn't me. And I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone who was a financial planner. And he said, and I quote, he said, "We normally don't hire people like you, but I think you'd be pretty good at this." And it was funny because I grew up in West Michigan in farm country, and I was somebody that, had I known what an engineer was besides somebody who drives a train, I think I would have been one. But I had no idea, and I had no role models that were engineers. And yet that's kind of my mentality. But by the way, what's funny is that my son is an engineer. My members of my wife's family are all engineers. I just seem to get along with those are my people.
With no money background, an English degree, as well as an inherent nature to understand how things operate, Joe began his 16-year career as a financial planner. And he ended up being one of 12 media spokesmen for American Express and then later Ameriprise. He says his unique talent is that he could talk about money from someone who knows nothing about it.
And so I became somebody who did media locally and nationally. I appeared on almost all of the, if you name a financial institution, I probably was there, whether it was TV, print, radio. And locally, twice a week, I was on the #1 news station in Detroit as the Channel 7 money man. So during that time, things were going really well.
But everything changed when his mentor decided to make a major career pivot.
And one day I walked into the office and there was a resignation letter from a guy who'd always been a mentor of mine named Chris. And in financial services, Connie, you probably know that you don't write a 2 weeks notice letter. You leave at midnight with all the client files, right?
Yeah.
So it was really weird. And he wrote this great piece that said, I like financial planning. I don't love it enough that it's all I want to do. I have and this is his quote, I have other mountains I want to climb. He'd done very well financially, and the rest of his letter said that he was going to go climb these other mountains. And what's funny is Chris went on to climb Mount Everest twice.
Wow.
And he also climbed most of the big peaks around the world. He's climbed Denali. He's climbed most of them. So very powerful. And it's funny, for him, it wasn't as much of an analogy as I thought it was. He really wanted to climb mountains. And now he runs an adventure travel company. And he doesn't do it because he needs the money. He does it because he loves it. And because he loves it, by the way, he's paid more, which I find interesting. And he obviously runs a great company because he loves it so much. So life isn't all about finding your passion, but when passion can meet profit, I think that's great. Well, for me, so I'm 40 at the time I'm reading this, and I thought to myself, you know what? I like it. I don't love it. I like the media piece, but the financial planning one-on-one, yeah, I love some of my clients, but some things I really didn't love. So I decided to sell my business. I had a franchise that I owned, and I sold my financial planning franchise, and I used that money to fund my way, A, to make sure I was financially independent, but then B, to fund my way through school, to go back and get a teaching certificate to become a high school teacher and a track coach. And I got a year into that, and I realized that what I was being taught was that I was being taught the fact that teaching is so difficult. Not the kids, but the fact that now it's teaching toward tests and it's checking a bunch of boxes, and there's never any real room for creativity in teaching. God bless teachers, because to me, it really seemed like it was a mess. And teachers that I had as clients that were now friends were telling me, they're like, you'd be great with kids, but you're going to hate teaching. Just you're always fighting administration. And so at the same time, as I was taking classes, I was getting letters from my other friends that had been doing public relations for companies like I had done for Amex, asking me to write their scripts for television, write their client newsletters. And I was having a blast. And now I'm teaching people about money. And I realized after about a year of teaching programs in school and my journey back to school that I did want to teach, but I really wanted to teach money, and I kind of wanted to do it my way. And that became a blog, which then later on became the Stacking Benjamins podcast, which is primarily what I do now. So how about that? That's about 40 turns, Connie.
And even one of Joe's earlier careers, prior to him being a financial planner and podcaster, is one where he leverages those skills today, particularly as an entrepreneur. And that's being a DJ.
So the DJ thing, I was actually in high school, and this is kind of a funny story. We were at one of my cousin's weddings, and my dad was really drunk. And the disc jockey was horrible at the wedding, Connie. He was just horrible. And he said to me and my little brother, he said, hey, I think you guys could do better than this. You could do way better than this. And my brother and I, we thought, yeah, how fun would that be up there, making everybody dance? This would be a great time. And he said, I'll tell you what, you guys come up with a business plan. I'm not going to give you the money. I'm not going to, throw my money down the toilet. What I will do is teach you kind of how to run a business. So you come up with a business plan, you research what it's going to take to start, and I will then decide, initial funding. I'll be your backer in a, very small venture, not Airbnb or anything, but Joe and Tony's DJ service. So we did all that homework. In hindsight, all of our homework was crap. It was horrible. But at the time, we really thought we knew what we were getting into. But that whole process was really neat, because then we owed my dad a bunch of money. that he gave to us with an interest rate, didn't give to us. We had to sign an official contract with him, and we started this business. And so it wasn't just about then entertaining people, which I learned a lot from that. It was also about having the pressure that an entrepreneur feels.
How do you think being a DJ, obviously having an English degree, being a public figure for Amex, have enabled you to successfully create what you have built today in a medium that is really still emerging?
Well, and it's funny. I think the biggest thing is it's easier to empathize people when you have something in common. So for anyone, the more you can get out and have different experiences and not do the same thing and find different people, do different tasks, it not only makes your life richer, I think, but it also makes it easier to have empathy with other people's situation, which when you're talking about money, there's a lot of empathy. You need to have a lot of empathy because everybody doesn't have the same starting point. They don't have the same privilege. And so going through all of those help just because they're so varied. At the time, it didn't seem like that. At the time, it just seemed like I was doing, you're doing the next thing in line. From being a DJ and entertaining people, I mean, it's funny, even though I do a money podcast, everything I think that you do to some degree comes down to entertainment, whether you're a training manager, just somebody that oversees people, you're trying to merge companies. Like if people like you and they feel this affinity toward you, they're more likely to want to do whatever it is that you're doing. And so finding a way to be entertaining, I think is a key task for all of us, even if it seems kind of superficial. English was big for me because of the fact that it taught me how to think logically, having that background. And it's funny to see, not funny, haha, but interesting, I think, to see how many people in finance actually have English degrees. I was very surprised to see.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, lots of money managers out there that have English degrees. And I think it's all being able to logically think through a position, logically tell a story, and connect with other people. So being good at writing, good at conveying the way that you feel about things. I think sometimes we have issues talking about how we feel. I think English majors especially are good at that. It's so funny because at the time I didn't think I was building anything. Like everything informs what I'm doing now. And I'm now at the place where I'm not like I was when I was a financial planner, and I'm not like Chris where I'm like, I like it, but I don't love it. No. I now feel like I'm in this wheelhouse where if I can do this, Connie, when I'm 95 years old and I'm hooked up to some oxygen tank and nobody really wants to listen to the podcast but me, if I have 2 listeners, I will be at the microphone because it is so fun what I get to do now on a daily basis.
Joe not only had a broad range of experiences in his early career, he also had the self-awareness to identify what he loved from each role. Through testing and learning in different industries, he found elements that stuck and aligned with his passions. Working with people from different backgrounds or perspectives also allowed him to gain the empathy that is crucial in forging relationships. And over time, he was able to merge his financial knowledge and experience in education with his entertainment and storytelling background. By combining these elements, Joe was in a position to create a money podcast that delivered value and entertainment in his own voice. He was initially hesitant, however, until he realized the unique perspective he could bring to the medium with a different take on a money podcast, which became the Stacking Benjamins.
It is not a lot like what people traditionally think of as money podcasts. And I wanted to do that for a reason. I think whenever you go into any business, you have to look at the competitive landscape. And I'm someone that had listened to lots of podcasts. I think that if you go into any business, you should be somebody that knows that business. I get frustrated when I talk to business owners or people in business and they haven't done any looked at any case studies of similar situations, or even situations that are congruent but are in other industries. When it comes to podcasts, I'm somebody that has been enjoying them for a long time. People told me because of my PR background that I should have one. And I kept saying, I have nothing to say that Susie Orman or Dave Ramsey or Jim Cramer haven't already said. And I certainly am not in the business like Susie of kind of being down about people, in their face about their money. It's not really been my approach. So I thought, in this landscape, there's nothing that I don't have anything to say that other people aren't doing very well. And then one day I was mowing my lawn, and I always listen to podcasts when I'm mowing, and I hear this NPR show called Car Talk. Are you familiar with Car Talk?
I am not.
So Car Talk was on for a long period of time. They actually still play it on a ton of NPR stations, even though one of the two brothers died. So it's these two brothers. They call themselves Click and Clack, and they answer questions from listeners, and they laugh a ton. And I'm listening to Car Talk, and I'm having a heck of a good time. And I realize I literally stopped my lawnmower. I mean, people go, well, I stopped my lawnmower and I LOL'd or whatever. No. I did. I stopped my lawnmower because I had the heavens open up, because I realized I'm listening to the show that's ostensibly about cars, and I'm learning nothing about a car. I'm learning nothing, and I'm completely enjoying myself. Now, I say I'm learning nothing. I'm probably learning a bunch, but I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on the fact that I'm just having a good time. And I realized that there was no one at the time doing that I knew of in personal finance. And I listened to a lot of personal finance people. The closest thing that there was at the time, the Motley Fool guys, if you remember in the early days, when it was just the two of them, they would always come out in their jester hats and they'd laugh a little bit, but they'd get serious in a hurry, about what they were talking about. Motley Fool still is a site, I think, that really takes itself seriously. And they do that very well. But I'm like, wow, if we had a show where you didn't really learn anything, that would be fantastic.
With Joe's inherent understanding of how people best learn based on his education experience, in addition to embracing the science of play, allowed Joe to find his position in the financial podcast market. It was all about making finance more approachable, interesting, and fun. Taking what he had also learned from others and applying his own voice was a conscious decision that he explains comes from the principle of stealing like an artist.
And then, and it's a little bit longer story than this, but over time, we've learned to embrace the comedy of the show. We've learned to embrace the fact that it's really light. But we also did something, and this also applies to any field, I think. We did something that a lot of people, I think, should do. There's this guy named Austin Kleon. He wrote a fantastic book called Steal Like an Artist. And Austin Kleon talks about taking things that you love, like Car Talk as an example, and not ripping them off, but paying homage to them and riffing on them and remixing them in a way where it's uniquely you. No artist ever got there by themselves. They actually started with something that was their inspiration. So use these inspirations that are all around you. So my kids were young at the time. There was a show that I really liked called Absolutely Mindy, where Mindy was grounded. It's a show for kids on XM radio. Actually, Mindy's still on the radio. Mindy Thomas is her name, and she's brilliant. Mindy, the ruse on her show, Connie, is that she's grounded. She's in her room, and she's supposed to be cleaning a room, but she's using a hairbrush as a microphone, and she's pretending she is a satellite radio show. And all of her friends call in, which is people like my kids. So kids from around the country call in. It was really fun. And so I really like that. And a lot of people thought we were doing Wayne's World when we decided the show would be live from my mom's basement. But I'm way geekier than that. It's actually from the show Absolutely Mindy that we are live from mom's basement. And most podcasters are trying to pretend like they're not in mom's basement. We decided to own it. Also, there was an inside joke there. I was in Texas at the time. There were no basements. So doing a show from the basement when we didn't even have one, I thought was hilarious. And then having a show that was that had segments. There was a Disney podcast that I really liked that no longer is around called Inside the Magic. And it was a bunch of segments during the show. And I kind of have ADD. And I think a lot of people do. And I like this idea of these short ideas. Plus, I could put more people on the show. So instead of having one guest, which I think is, the brilliance of a lot of shows like yours, we would have 5 different people on the show, have them on for a shorter period of time. But then I'd also have 5 people talking about our show and nobody knew anything about us. So the show was meant to move, be really light. And then these jokes started appearing, like, a joke a lot of our fans say today is, if you learn anything when you listen to Stacking Benjamins, you keep it to yourself because you'll ruin our reputation. So we do that. My mom's neighbor, Doug, is our answer guy. And the neighborhood, Mom's Neighborhood, is kind of developed like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood over time. And it has been a lot of fun, a ton of fun making the show.
Joe's career pivot and the ability to create a business out of this newfound path was not only driven by passion, it was also strategic on many levels. After evaluating the competition and identifying his own niche, he incorporated what he learned from studying other podcast genres. And as Joe shared, stealing like an artist requires you to pay attention to others and apply what you've learned through your own lens. By taking this approach, coupled with the ability to continually adapt and clearly defining your target audience, it enables you to carve out and maintain your positioning in the market.
This idea of knowing your market, knowing where you fit, I think is so important. And not just to be different, but to use your words, to find your voice and and you're not going to find it right away. You're going to stumble. We've stumbled a lot. We've had to reiterate over time. I know a few years in, we blew up our format and restarted everything. We got much more serious about comedy. We got more serious about learning how to be professional at comedy instead of just a few guys that were funny. We also learned that a show is better if our guests are very diverse, and not diversity because you're checking boxes, but diversity because people learn better from people that are like them. So having people that are different ages, from different backgrounds, with different stories to tell, gives this much better fabric where it's easier to surprise people and also bring more people into the fold. And I also think, and it's funny because we get some negative reviews sometimes about people wish we wouldn't joke around so much, which is funny because I actually think that when people stop taking themselves so seriously and they're more open and relaxed, they're actually probably going to learn a lot more when they think they're not learning. And that's who I'm trying to reach. I'm not really trying to reach the money nerd who's going to listen to a show anyway. I'm trying to reach the person that really is harder to reach on money topics because they think it's so opaque and it's so boring. If I can reach that person and make them see it as fun and different, they actually, contrary to our reputation, they just might learn something about better money management skills.
And I can see where taking all of that and understanding who your audience is also so ties back to you and your ability to relate to, the average everyday Joe, where I also know that given you didn't grow up being in finance, you'd mentioned you're a farm kid. And so you had to learn about money yourself. So you have this ability to really connect with those who have been in the same situation. And you're really taking, that element of you and bring that forward.
But then this is difficulty, and I actually want to turn this around and talk to you about that because everybody, Connie, doesn't have that. So you know what I mean? Where they have that background. I mean, there's going to be people listening to this where they don't have that. What do those people do?
Well, I think for them, much of it is starting to hopefully talk to people like you or learn from people that may be different and see their various paths. So one of the things that have been incredibly valuable for me in interviewing others who've come from nonlinear paths or non-corporate paths are the steps that they took to get there, the differentiated thinking, really mindset that they have, where they're willing to try. They're willing to test and learn and see what sticks and not let fear get in the way of taking some of those risks. Because at the end of the day, not everybody really knows what it is that they want to do, which actually is a great segue into what I'd love to ask you about and talk further about, which is, we know that there is a continual trend towards people looking to find, greater passion and purpose in the work that they do. So whether it is folks like you, where you've worked for a period of time, was very successful, but realized that you wanted to do something different. To many of those generational, those next gen leaders who are constantly pivoting, constantly testing and learning to figure out what it is they may want to do, they're trying to find that thing that sticks. But what do you think are the key challenges that people face in successfully making that career pivot?
I think the biggest thing, and I think you kind of alluded to it earlier, is between your ears, right? I think our brain is brilliant at bringing up obstacles and telling us what the obstacles are that are in our way. And by the way, a lot of people, when they feel these obstacles, I think we usually do the wrong thing. We go, oh no, I can't do that because of this. These are all my big problems. Yet if we take those problems and we realize how brilliant our brain is to throw these up, because they are true, right? All these obstacles probably are true. But we also know that our brain is also great at solving those things. But I think we stop too soon. We stop at the obstacle and we don't push past it. And I think the way that we do that is we get it out of our head. We start off with the goal. And then we talk about, when I reach this goal, how are things going to look? How is life going to be better when I get whatever this pivot is? And I think you have to write that out, only to spend a moment with it and let yourself kind of process how great this is going to be when you get there. And then I would write out each of those objections that your brain has, like get them out on paper, and then one by one come up with the strategy to solve each of them. Because I think that once you have them down, what most of us find is that, yes, these are all real objections, but your brain, as smart as your brain is at creating those, bringing those forward, these true things, your brain's also great at creating solutions for each of them. And when you get them down, you find out they're not nearly as scary as you thought that they were. And the path forward is usually much, much easier than you thought it was. I used to do this with people's financial plan. Once we got people would have so much fear, around money, they'd have so much fear. And once we actually wrote down all the fears, and then we wrote down the strategy to overcome the fear, you could see my clients relax. You could see their shoulders go back. But I think no matter what the pivot is, Connie, I think that is a great thing to put yourself through. And I've seen a lot of great coaches, the people at Strategic Coach, as an example, big coaching firm, they use that strategy. So many great coaches use that strategy with their clients. And I used to use it with clients as well. And I use it myself. Just love it. Get it all down on paper.
As Joe mentioned, it's all about getting out of one's own head and pushing past that fear, which is what gets many stuck when it comes to making that successful career transition. It requires you to stop negotiating against yourself and identifying, addressing, and overcoming these self-imposed obstacles. And to move forward, you have to first change the way you think of security versus opportunity.
I think the biggest myth is that the place I am is more secure than where I want to be. I think that's a huge one. And in fact, I think if it's somebody trying to step either into a new career or into entrepreneurship themselves, or into just trying a side hustle or going after the next promotion, I think we get lulled into sleep that the place we are now is pretty secure. There's a real estate guru, a guy named Robert Allen, who a number of years ago wrote this phenomenal analogy where he said there's two doors in life, and one door says security and the other one says opportunity. And the person who reaches for the security door over the opportunity door almost always gets neither one. And I've seen that be the case so often. So I think if there's any misconception, it's that the security door is better than the opportunity door.
What do you think also gets people stuck in making that mindset shift? Because opportunity sounds so positive, but people tend to go to the negative first and foremost.
Oh, sure. Because it goes back to that. Our brain throws up all the objections. Well, if I go to the opportunity door, I might be this. What about my paycheck? What about this thing? What about, you're going to bring up all and write those all down and then solve them one by one. And I think it's a very simple way to get rid of a lot of that fear.
So in your experience, where you shifted that mindset to creating opportunities, I know when you first started your podcast, you had intentionally created that first iteration where you knew it would fail. So some of it was by testing and learning and trying, you realized that was an opportunity versus I think most people would treat it as rejection.
You did all the homework.
I did.
You did all of the homework. So we did. We knew that there were a lot of things that we didn't know. I was afraid, like everybody else is afraid, of having a new brand that I'm really proud of and putting this thing out that I was fairly certain was going to be subpar. I'd heard from a lot of podcasters ahead of time that you just need to get out there. But I didn't want to get out there with a final product because I didn't know enough about what I didn't know because it was a new industry to me. And I also knew that the format and finding our voice was an important thing. People told me it took 7, 8, 9 episodes to get under your belt before you really started finding your voice. And frankly, even maybe 100 episodes before you really started finding your voice and your tribe. So we created this show. Our website was called The Free Financial Advisor, which had a lot of SEO value. But besides that, was just a horrible name for a website. But we created the show called The Worst of the Free Financial Advisor. A, because we wanted truth in advertising. We thought it was going to be the worst. But B, we also thought that it was a funny name. And we wanted, as I mentioned before, we wanted the show to be funny and have a funny vibe. So we wanted people to come there with the right feeling. And then we took this show. We also knew that wasn't going to be the permanent name. So just like preseason baseball or testing or whatever it might be, we said, we're going to give this an unlucky number. We're going to do this for 13 episodes. As I mentioned earlier, I knew I'd done enough homework. I knew 7 episodes was what was the number of episodes people say it took to kind of get your footing. So I wanted to do nearly double that. I could have gone 14, but 13 was an unlucky number. And I knew that this podcast was going to die. So I wanted to be unlucky. So we went 13 episodes. And true enough, we got to number 7. And I really thought we knew then, okay, the kinks were worked out. We kind of knew what we were doing. And we did another 6. And then we changed everything. I mean, not changed everything, but we went, by that time, then we had our real brand. We thought we had our real show and made all the tweaks to the real show. By the way, that reiteration wasn't the one that really did it for us. I thought at the time we knew what we were doing. We went about another 2 years and the show wasn't doing much of anything. It was growing, but not very quickly. And I remember my co-host looking at me across the card table going, what are we doing? Like, what the heck? Why are we still here? And he was thinking about quitting. And I'm Mr. Glass is half full. And I'm like, no, it's going to be great. It's whatever. And then I went to an industry conference, which, by the way, if people listening are not going to industry conferences, shame on you. I berate my brother all the time. And berate is the right word. I feel bad because I shouldn't do it. But he always says, I don't have money to go. I can't afford to go. You can't afford not to go. You have to. You and I met at an industry conference.
Absolutely.
And going and finding other people and networking with those people and learning what they know and sharing points. It's so unbelievably valuable. Like everything that's happened to us that's good has come from industry conferences. Not everything, but a big piece of it. So doing all those things, I think, is important.
As we've learned from Joe, as well as guests from past podcasts, today's career journey is no longer a linear one. In fact, it's entrepreneurial in many ways, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. So while making the decision to pivot and laying out strategies to guide you towards success is a massive step forward, it's just a couple among many steps that you have to take to get to your end goal. You have to continuously evolve to create the progression and momentum you're striving for. it all takes time. And as Joe explains, there will be uncertainty in life and in business. So feel the fear, but do it anyway.
You're still going to feel fear. And I feel lots of fear all the time. Moments before you said we're hitting record, I got this huge fear sensation. And I have this mantra I tell myself over and over, which I don't know if you know this, but Nike has not always had the phrase, let's do it. Before they had let's do it, they had another one. And I can see why let's do it. What am I talking about? Just do it, right? Mm-hmm. So Nike says, just do it. But they used to say, feel the fear, but do it anyway, which is clunkier. But for me, it speaks much more to what I face, and I think a lot of people face all the time, which is you can clearly define where you want to go. You can lay out all of the objections, and you can put out strategies to overcome those. You can do your case analysis ahead of time. You can know the industry. You're still going to feel fear, but feel the fear and do it anyway.
How do you help manage that emotion? Because as I've come to learn, and it was through this wonderful psychologist that I had the chance to interview, many times it is the emotions that ultimately get in the way of you acting in the right fashion, or it dictates a lot of your behavior. Many people assume it's actually your cognition. The reality, it's the emotions that trigger the behaviors. So what insights do you have based on your experience in helping to manage those emotions that oftentimes are the key inhibitors to getting you to where you want to go?
So I'm a baseball fan. There's a guy named Austin Jackson who played for my Detroit Tigers. But Austin Jackson used to play for the Tigers, and he grew up in Texas. And so when the Tigers went to Texas for a game in July, outside, by the way, the Texas Rangers do not have a roof. Their new stadium will, but the current stadium does not. So it's hot. We used to, when I lived in Texas, we'd go watch when the Tigers would go play the Rangers, and it would be 105 degrees during these games. And people would ask Austin Jackson, hey, you grew up here. How do you acclimate? How do you get used to this? And you know what he said? He said, you don't. You just realize that's what it is and you endure it. And I think that's a great analogy when it comes to fear and managing fear, is that when you realize that that's a part of the equation and you realize you're not going to get rid of it. I think that's where that phrasing really helps me, is that, yeah, okay, now I'm feeling this fear. I know it's here. I know it's going to be here every time. And I'm just going to recognize that it's here and I'm going to do it anyway. Fear is a passenger that's in the back seat wherever I go. And I just have to get used to the fact that that's the case. I don't think we can get rid of it.
Well, I know that for myself as well, that I also feel the same way whenever I'm starting something new. You do have a little bit of that feeling in the pit of your stomach because you're being taken out of your comfort zone. So a lot of this, as you have said, it's accepting the fact that being put out of your comfort zone is going to make you feel nervous. But the more you do it, the better you will become at managing it and getting to a point where you develop probably more resilience against that, because it becomes less unpredictable, but a bit more predictable because you would have then done it several times.
Yeah, I agree. It's like reps then, right? Like it just, like you realize when you work out, there's going to be some pain afterwards, but that's not a bad thing. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yes, yeah, exactly. You know what to expect over time.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, because you've been able to go through it so many times, you will know what potentially the outcome is and then how to manage against it. Because it's the uncertainty that we all deal with, in which that's also what creates fear. But if you know what the potential outcomes are, then you're more likely to know how to address it when it does come.
Well, and I think that's where, just circling back to a point that I really, really love, this idea that we kind of mentioned for a few seconds, this idea of case studies. The more you can look at people that have traveled the road ahead of you and see what they did, and read about their fears. This is why I like biography so much, you know?
Me too.
I love the part where the business was almost about to fail. Things were going off the rails and somehow they pulled through. Like, that's my favorite part. I generally get three-quarters of the way through a biography and I know the rest of the story where they're going to be uber successful. You know, they live happily ever after. I'm not interested in that part. I really like that time when it looks like at any second the train might go off the track and they're throwing everything they can at it and getting through that. Like that gives me confidence. So I love case studies for the very reason you're talking about.
Understanding the road traveled among other successful people is an important element when making that career transition. It allows us to see obstacles that we may be afraid of and realize that they can be overcome, while also providing us with additional insights on how to succeed. But always remember to clearly define who you are and what you stand for to help you get to where you want to go.
How important do you feel it is in today's business to clearly define your own personal positioning and brand? You've obviously been able to do that for your podcast, which has blown up into this amazing business. But do you feel it's also something that anybody now needs to do in light of kind of the world we're at today?
I think the clearer you are about what you want to be, the easier it's going to be to get there. So while I wouldn't stress too much that you don't have a perfect vision, certainly we didn't, but I did know a few things. I knew my differentiation. I knew how we were different than other brands that I knew of. I knew enough about the space to know that we were different and how we were going to be different. I knew that voice, I had this gut feeling that there were people that wanted that voice. And you know where that gut feeling mostly came from, Connie? It's funny. It came from because that's what I wanted. Like, I'd been in finance at that time for 21, 22 years. I knew I wanted more of that. I wanted less heavy. I didn't want CNBC and people yelling at me, you know, and I enjoy watching CNBC like any other self-respecting money nerd, but I didn't want that. There was this whole other population not being served the way that I thought that they could be. But I still didn't get overwhelmed in, you know, knowing I knew it was going to change, and it wasn't so in concrete that I didn't feel like I had to keep going down a set road. I gave myself the permission to pivot as we went a little bit, but I certainly knew the vibe we were going for and that there was this group of people that wanted that.
I love that point that you made, that you gave yourself the permission to pivot and that you just inherently knew that you weren't going to be able to plan out everything, that you let serendipity, I guess, to some degree, kind of take its course. I think when you pursue that entrepreneurial journey, or you pursue, you know, a different career path, that is the road that hasn't been taken yet. That's somewhat of the mentality and mindset that you have to adopt in order to continue down this sort of marathon road.
Yeah, I think that when you're an entrepreneur, I think the ego is a hard thing, don't you think?
Absolutely.
It's our ego that is why we're so successful, but at the same time, it is the reason why we become a dumpster fire. And it's because having enough ego to be able to say, nope, I think this works, but also having enough empathy and listening skills and putting your ego in the back seat to say, you know what, I think that there might be a better way. There might be a tweak here that's going to be better than the way I'm going. I think somehow walking that tightrope is important. And the way we did it, I don't know the way everybody does, but I'll tell you the way we did it. We had a good friend of mine who was an alpha listener. I was thankful for my friend Doug, who listened to every episode early on, and he knew that I knew that he loved me and that he was going to be a friend. So we skipped all of the sandwich stuff that you get when you're giving people feedback, and he just ripped the show. I mean, he would call me and he'd rip the show. And, every once in a while he would give me the, it's a good show, but it could be so much better. And I agreed. And so because I had, and we talk about this all the time on our podcast, I think it's a mistake not to surround yourself with people smarter than you and that have come at the world differently than you do. You have blind spots, whether you want to admit it or not. And being able to surround yourself with those people and then be honest enough to know that you can't see everything it's so tough, but it's also so valuable to get that feedback. That was a big key to our success, having that alpha listener rip the show.
I can completely see that being incredibly valuable and insightful where, many times we have blinders on, and I think the challenge that many look at the world through our own narrow lens. And unless you have the self-awareness to seek others' input or the willingness to take a more global view, it can be really challenging. And that you end up having these blind spots that don't let you ultimately reach your potential.
It's funny because if you read, I've read quite a few books. One of my favorites is a book, an older book called The E-Myth, Why Most Businesses Fail and What to Do About It. And I love the piece in there, to your point, that most small businesses don't fail because they're unsuccessful. They fail because the business owner was very successful, but then got so busy that they weren't able to listen to what the next step was, and they ended up with incomplete systems. And it's all this listening that they weren't able to do. And frankly, then they end up, instead of delegating things, they end up abdicating. And I mean, we've seen this a million times, right? Somebody seems uber successful and they just kind of flame out, or they hit this wall head on where all of a sudden it goes from wonderful to horrible. And it's all this ability to listen.
So that brings up an interesting point that you mentioned, which to me is about ongoing skill acquisition. What is your perspective in terms of the mindset of continuous skill acquisition versus sort of just saying you've mastered this one particular area? Because what I'm seeing with this next generation of leaders is this ongoing desire to build upon skills within maybe your area that you're in, but really it being much more expansive because it then enables you to pivot into something different.
I love this topic. This is one of my favorite topics of all time. So I'm so glad that we're going to go down this road, because I actually think, Connie, that what you need to do is to continually learn outside of your field, because I think that it very much, in very weird ways, informs what you do. I go to, I'm bringing up Disney a lot. Fans of my show know that I'm a big fan of the mouse, and I like their business process. I like seeing how they take employees who aren't the highest paid employees in the industry, and they're so delighted. Like what turns me on about Disney probably isn't the same thing that turns on other people. Like, as a fellow business owner, I really like seeing somebody who's mastered their area just do it right. But I go on a trip to Disney and I bring back all these ideas for my podcast, or I'm inspired because of my podcast. I try to turn off the entrepreneur when I go on vacation, but we can't completely. We try to, but we just don't, because it's in our blood. But you come back and you have all this inspiration. And I think that studying areas outside of those key tasks sometimes are where the real gems are. And they inform you so much. I took a class recently on design that was taught by a couple of curators from the Smithsonian. And it was
interesting.
It was fantastic. It was on Skillshare. I mean, it's Skillshare.com. Anybody can go there. But these two people, so it was a series of videos. And I take some of these master classes, from people like Aaron Sorkin, who created The West Wing. And I try to find these creative people doing things that are a little bit like what we do, but not exactly what we do. Study from comedians, once again, masterclass, or a class in photography that I took that was absolutely just incredible. And you get these great ideas because of the fact that they're not what you always do, that this time away learning about other things makes you better at that primary task. It's really interesting to me. So yes, I love this idea of what you're talking about, younger generation and expanding the width of the knowledge, not the depth. The depth is important, but once you get a certain level of depth, I think it's about the width as much as it is that. Great topic.
Creating career and business momentum involves surrounding yourself with people smarter than you, who come at the world differently than you do. And it also entails expanding the breadth of your knowledge, not just depth. And those inspirational lessons from experts outside of your field can add to your wisdom, which you can apply to your own work in various ways, just like Joe does. But also realize that making any career pivot isn't going to be all sunshine and roses, but it's those bad days that can make you appreciate the good. So, as Joe continues to expand his horizons, how has his definition of career success evolved over time?
I used to think that it was more about me. And I always heard this when I was young, but I didn't pay a lot of attention to it, that really the thrill is in serving other people. It totally is. When you serve other people, it makes your job so much more fun. It just makes your job so much more fun. This life of service and getting used to serving other people. Like I feel like in my 20s, I was more takey. I was more, what does the world have for me that I can take and build my Joe empire around? And the older I get, the more I'm like, you know what? If I can help Connie get what she wants, A, it's so fun. It is so fun. And B, I do a money podcast, and some of our listeners sometimes are like, well, how do I get 50 cents more? How do I save 30 cents, 40 cents? All I know is that if I help a lot of people do great things, I'm always going to be okay. I'm always going to have places to turn, and I'll always have wealth around me. And that's kind of hidden. I mean, it's right out there, Connie, but by the same token, we see so much selfishness around us that I think it's that road less traveled sometimes, a lot. I think it is the road less traveled.
So I hear passion with a purpose to service others. It's really what you're about.
That's what you should have just said that immediately, and I wouldn't have had to talk for the last 4 minutes.
And what was some of the best work advice you've ever received?
The best piece of advice actually came. There's a popular conference that I was the MC of for a few years called FinCon. It's where money and media meet. It's about 2,500 money nerds get together every year, and I was the MC. And the guy that created the conference, he was nice enough to have me do it when nobody knew my brand, and it really helped me get an early spotlight. And after doing that for 3 years, Philip Taylor's his name, he said to me at the end of, I came off the stage to introduce the closing keynote speaker. I went to the back of the room. Philip, we call him PT for Philip Taylor. We just call him PT. So PT gives me a hug and he says, "Hey man, that was fantastic. Do you want to do it again?" And I said, "I don't think there's anything more my brand can really get out of this, PT. Like all these people know me now. Like there really is nothing else in it." And he turned to me and he gave me this great piece of advice where he said, "Sometimes it's not about you. Sometimes it's about serving your community." And that was one of the biggest wake-up calls. And by the way, that wasn't a long time ago. I was maybe 48, 49 when this happened. So I already knew a bunch of stuff about a bunch of stuff. And I realize now that was one of the dumbest things I could have ever said. It was clearly short-sighted. And it's funny because I miss emceeing that conference. And it's partly because PT gave me exactly what I wanted, which was, there's nothing in it for me. Oh, there definitely was a lot in it for me. Serving a community is not always a bad thing. It's a great thing.
Right. And each time you do that, you have an opportunity to learn and meet new people too. So to close, knowing what you know now, what advice would you tell your younger self?
Don't try to reinvent the wheel all the time. I was pretty cocky. I thought that I could do everything, and I thought half the fun was experimenting. And yes, a lot of the fun is experimenting. However, if you partner with people that have already been through where you want to go, and maybe put your ego in check a little bit and do that, you'll get there much faster.
Wonderful. And finally, what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Oh, say hi to me on Twitter. I'm Average Joe Money. You can obviously listen to us wherever you're listening right now. Definitely us after you, because you actually learn things on your show, Connie.
Thank you.
So you can do that. You're not going to learn anything listening to ours, but Stacking Benjamins is every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Or you can just shoot me an email at joe@stackingbenjamins, and I'm always happy to chat.
Well, it was wonderful having you as a guest and sharing your compelling story of those career pivots, finding that passion for purpose to help others, and really sharing this interesting journey.
Well, thanks a ton for having me. I'm a huge fan of your work, as you know, from the conference where we met, Podcast Movement. And I'm really excited that I got an opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you.
There will always be fear when you are looking to change the norm, but making that career pivot really is possible, regardless of your stage in life. Remember, you are not the first person to pivot, as many of our podcast guests have shown us, and you certainly won't be the last. Be clear about what you want to be and what you want to do while understanding where you fit in the market. And don't be afraid to steal like an artist to identify what it is that resonates with you and what uniquely differentiates you. It's about finding your unique voice and positioning. Test, adapt, and learn from others so that you can shift your mindset from one that values security to one that values opportunity. And by being able to craft what it is you love, you might even be able to create a business out of it and marry passion with profit. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. To connect with Joe, you can contact him at joe@stackingbenjamins.com. That's JOE@stackingbenjamins.com, or find him on Twitter at Average Joe Money. If you've liked what you heard, please share this podcast with others so they too can benefit from Joe's valuable wisdom and advice. To get show notes, links, and more tips and advice from this episode, you can visit us at strategicmomentum.co/podcast. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.